Hello, hello. Welcome to the first episode of EpiSoft's podcast. I am Jeremy. I work in business development under this wonderful fellow here, who I'll let introduce himself.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. For those who are listening, I'm Edward, EpiSoft's Business Development Manager. This feels very new and exciting for us. Hopefully, you all find something a little bit valuable from our conversation. Nice to be with you.
Yes, fingers crossed. There's some value in this. And we're going to be talking a lot today about IFC and HC21. Obviously, our folks in finance will know what that is. For anybody less familiar, I was thinking maybe we should quickly define what both of those are.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. It's a lot of jargon that goes around in the health sector, but effectively, IFC is simply informed financial consent. So it's the act of patients consenting to the financial implications of their stay, whether it be in a hospital or another model of care. And an HC21 is an official document, an Australian standard that authorises the hospital to claim the health fund benefits directly from the health fund, and it's the patient who is authorising the hospital to do so.
Beautiful. And on that very exciting note, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, so the first thing I thought would be helpful to talk about is because a lot of the conversations we've had over the past few months have been kind of about revenue, IFC and prepayments, things like that. And so I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is, from a lot of the hospitals that you're speaking with, where do they often say the revenue leakage occurs? I guess particularly within private hospitals.
Yeah. Um, Mostly I'm coming from the inpatient context where they typically have um, the procedure that they're coming in for is booked well in advance, but
Mm.
um, a lot of things need to go right for all the revenue to be captured.
Yeah.
You've got that Medicare component in Australia, you've got the private health fund component, and then the patient payer component. And really, a lot of the problems I see arise around the private health component because there's a lot of documentation and paperwork to support the claim that the private
Mm.
health funds require. So I see a lot of the issues is where that paperwork falls in the gaps.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And do you tend to, in the hospitals you speak with, do you see some of these same things arise with public hospitals and services?
Yeah, certainly the same types of problems and the process issues. In a public context, it's a little bit different where
Yeah.
there's obviously much less use of private health insurance, but
Yeah.
it certainly still exists,
Yeah.
especially in a public hospital with an emergency department. A
Mhm.
lot of patients present, and there's an opportunity to collect compensables from
Mm.
patients with private health insurance, and you still
Yeah.
need to have the right paperwork then. And
Yeah.
certainly, whilst it's not a health fund requirement, when a patient presents without private health insurance and without Medicare, and say they're coming from overseas and they're Medicare ineligible, then
Hmm.
you still need paperwork according to various state policies or even hospital policies.
Yeah. Like it can get quite murky quite quickly. Okay. And in your conversations talking about IFC workflows with hospitals, do they tend to describe it as a finance problem or as something that happens even earlier in the workflow?
Well, it's a bit of both, funnily enough. Usually the problems happen earlier in the workflow, but then finance end up having to deal with it.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
So often I'm speaking to a lot of the finance teams, but actually um, the missed opportunities and the gaps are happening really in the patient services side at pre-admission. So the finance aren't even involved when the
Yeah.
issues arise.
Yeah. Okay. As they say, they have to deal with it downstream, downstream of the problem.
Yeah, there's all
Okay.
things. Yes.
I know. Okay. And I mean, when the patient classification is wrong at booking, I guess first, what might happen in a scheduled admission, if there happens to be some kind of error with patient classification.
Yeah, we'd be mainly talking about the private hospital context in that
Okay.
scenario. But um, if there's a incorrect classification, say of how the patient's paying in a scheduled admission, um, often there is a lot of opportunities to pick that up.
Mm,
Patients can have usually ample time to talk to their insurer about their coverage, but issues can arise. And if that's really left until the last minute, then certainly that creates a lot of chaos for the hospital and for the patient. So, for example, a patient hasn't got adequate coverage with their private health insurance, or they haven't served their waiting period,
mm,
and the hospital goes to do an online eligibility check, at least in Australia, um, then that can lead to a cancelled procedure due to
mm,
the patient not being able to pay. And so
yeah.
there's that awkward conversation around financials right at the last minute.
Yeah.
So obviously, the earlier the better, but even there's a lot of instances where that's not possible, where the procedure's more urgent,
Hmm.
and so you can leave all of that paperwork to the last minute, which is where the issues arise.
Yeah. No, that's just difficult with the with everything going smoothly and being utilized efficiently. Okay. And I guess kind of not conversely, but in a different vein, I guess when we are talking more about the public context, if there are more unscheduled admissions, like you kind of touched on, an emergency department in particular, what do you often hear them talk about in those situations?
Yeah, this, from what I've heard, is a lot more messy. There's a
Hmm.
lot of dark arts to
Dark
get
art.
this right.
Harry
Um,
Potter.
yeah, they obviously the patient's presenting when they need the service, right? So you don't have
Hmm.
that benefit of the lead up and the
Yeah.
preparation. Um, and so it's less a classification problem, but more a missed opportunity. So
Mm.
public hospitals under Australian legislation are allowed, with the correct paperwork and with the patient's election,
Hmm.
to claim the benefit from the private health fund for their stay if it proceeds to an admission.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, if that's if yeah, so that's for private health fund patients, and then with a patient who has not got no Medicare and no private health fund, then they're considered self-funding, if you like.
Hmm.
And then there's a whole different conversation. So
Yeah.
it's less of a misclassification and more, say, if the patient has private health insurance but they're not detected, then there's a
Yeah.
missed revenue opportunity for the hospital. And
Yeah.
likewise, if someone's got no private health insurance, no Medicare, then that's a very significant financial issue, because obviously the hospital has that duty of care to
Yeah.
provide a service, but then there's often issues arise if there's not appropriate consent or understanding by the patient about the financial implications of their admission.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's like, of course, they want to help people, but if they run out of resources, then they're not going to be able to help anybody. Okay,
That's
that makes
right.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot
Um.
of there's a lot of public hospitals I'm hearing are in this situation.
Hmm.
There's too few people, too few resources to keep up with the demand.
Yeah.
So whilst hospitals, their core business is care, it's
Yeah.
often been jeopardized by, you know, a bit of financial issues. So
Yeah.
having a healthy financial approach can support their core business of care.
Yeah. I was going to say, even with our tiny population here in Australia, but it made me realize that kind of goes to the next question is how often are hospitals getting overseas patients, or other compensable patients that do slip through the cracks or get missed?
Yeah. I mean, don't have the stats to hand.
Yeah.
I'm far from an expert on this, but yeah, I think the overseas tend to be more of an issue, just because with the private health insurance patients who happen to have Medicare anyway,
Hmm.
they obviously, it's still an election, it's a choice
Yeah.
by the patient. So if they don't use it, then um, you know there's no issue with the care; it can all go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But with the overseas patients, that can be very problematic.
Yeah.
These procedures, depending on what they're coming in for, can cost several thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. So
Yeah.
uh, I just hear from public hospitals that like they'll have a stack of um, accounts from overseas patients on any given day that they're being asked to write off because they
Mm.
can't chase them. The patient has
Yeah.
gone home; they're uncontactable, or
Yeah.
there was not an appropriate consent process.
Yeah. Okay. No, that is tough. What kinds of stories have you heard, from hospitals and people who work there about exactly where the HC21 or IFC documentation tends to break down?
Yeah, is this in a more in a public or a private context?
I guess we could do private first, and then talk about if there's any differences that you've perceived in within privates. I mean, sorry, within
Yeah,
publics.
I mean the processes are the same, but uh, due to the timeliness aspect, I
Yep.
guess in a public, it tends to be more problematic, like more sensitive to issues going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So in a private, yeah, the problems usually arise on day of admission, even
Yep.
though that they've had, much potentially much longer to have prepared.
Right.
So just in my experience, I've seen that often there's an HC21 and IFC being presented to the patient only when they arrive for their procedure,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with the HC21. Although I have seen, uh, hospitals waiting until the day before to
Right.
provide the estimate of fees to the patient, which is often
Uh-huh.
an awkward conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes lead to the procedure being cancelled. But
Yeah.
yeah, the HC21, if just focusing on that, I mean, it is just a very simple one-page form for the patient to complete and just a
Mm-hmm.
signature. But still, with everything else, those poor patient services teams need to do on
Yeah.
day of admission, if that
Yep.
gets missed, yeah, it's pretty consequential.
Yeah. Versus if it was done well in advance of them coming to the hospital.
That's right. And
Okay.
the health funds have algorithms and processes to find um, these particular patients. They can audit the hospitals to make sure that they've actually done these forms.
Yeah.
So it's really
Okay.
important to get right. In a
Okay.
public context, they're also important, but because say for the even for the private health fund patients
Mm.
who are electing to use it, the IFC process is much more simple because usually there's no out of pocket for the
Mm.
patient. It's just the health fund benefit that's flowing to the hospital as a result of the election. The
Okay.
HC21, though, is important.
Yep.
Um, and just anecdotally, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that there can be an issue where the patient presents out of hours, and usually there's a team of people, patient liaison managers, who are being tasked to have those discussions with patients about electing. And if
Mm.
they are not there in those out of hours periods,
Yeah.
people have to sleep, then
Yeah.
that's where misdocumentation arises and
Mm-hmm.
the missed opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a lot of after hours, out of hours things that
Yeah,
crop up. Okay.
people don't necessarily attend ED uh, in civil hours, right? That's the whole
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Exactly. And I mean, how have you seen or heard about financial clearance affecting the patient experience?
Mm. I think in many cases, more of the consequences are borne by the hospital because it's a
Mm.
financial, but and of course they still usually perform the care, the clinical need that the
Yeah.
patient requires. That's just a
Yeah.
duty of care and ethics.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially in the overseas patients, no Medicare, no private health insurance,
Yeah.
that can be quite detrimental to the experience. I've spoken to hospitals who have had to have the conversation while their family member is, under anesthesia in their
Mm.
hospital with the
Mm-hmm.
family overseas about
Wow.
financial clearance. And so that's not a great experience for the patient and their family, but
Yeah.
it's often an awkward necessity because the appropriate paperwork has been missed.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of just hopefully less awkward for everybody involved to
Yeah,
have. Yeah.
yeah. There's a whole patient experience angle to this. It's not just about financial. The patient is at the center of what the hospitals are doing
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. I had an aunt who in Cebu in the Philippines, and her mother recently passed away, and she was in ICU for I think 10 days or something. And the hospital there, they won't release the body until the amount is paid in full. And so like she wouldn't have been able to bury, you know what I mean? And I think it was something to the tune of like 20,000 Australian, you know.
yeah.
Absolutely hectic.
In my
I know.
in my short global experience,
Yeah.
you know, in other parts of Asia Pacific, the Australian attitude of care first, money later, is
Mhm.
certainly not the standard.
Yeah.
Um, so, when patients present, the first thing that is asked for is about how are they paying,
Yeah.
whereas Australian hospitals tend to lead with, how can we serve you and what's wrong.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
so, yeah, but those differences exist for a reason,
Mhm.
and really providing a generic process improvement whilst keeping the patient at the centre of the care
Yeah.
is, I think, something that all hospitals would be striving for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's Australia, huh? It's quite humane, right? That's why I guess it's quite humane compared to a lot of other places.
Yeah.
Um, when hospitals talk about the IFC problems, right? We kind of talked about it is the finance teams who are kind of downstream of that. Why is it that they tend to be the ones chasing after discharge?
Because they own the P&L of the
Yeah.
hospital. Um, the you know the role typically of the patient services, the front desk, is to register the patient, navigate them to the care. The
Yeah.
finance people are asked to be accountable
Hmm.
for um, the revenue and the losses of the hospital. So
Yeah.
they're the ones signing off the write-offs, and
Yeah.
it's it is a reflection of the finance team if there's too many write-offs.
Yeah. And again, so these delayed payments and write-offs tend to originate from typically admission and the front desk and, you know,
Yeah,
well before. Yeah. Okay.
that's typically right.
Yeah. And look, this is probably going to be obviously we're not going to have data on this, but just anecdotally, what have you heard about how much time that these finance staff are spending having to later correct and amend those front end errors?
Mm. Difficult to say. I think
Yeah.
the word correct, uh, in
No.
some way, you can never correct it.
Mm, mm,
It's already happened and the ship has sailed, right? If you
yeah.
don't have if you haven't processed the claim properly, you
Yeah.
can't fix it after the fact.
It's like damage control.
Um, yeah, damage control is probably a better word
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
describe it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean it can be their entire job for
Yeah.
some finance staff. Uh,
Yeah.
as I talked about, finance people in hospitals I'd spoken to who are writing off claims regularly. Um, so it would be a lot of time, I would guess. It's difficult to say how much. They're
Yeah.
doing other vital functions for the hospital.
Yeah.
Payroll, keeping the lights on, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. And so any amount is too much.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that would be the goal, right? Is we
Yeah.
always want to redirect time from anything that's not patient care. We were trying to reallocate it back to patient care,
Yeah.
and there's
Just to
no
uplift
different to
those
finance.
outcomes. Yeah, of course, of course. And look, we've kind of been circling this too, but what are hospitals often saying about why this we'll fix it later approach doesn't usually work very well?
In many cases, it's inappropriate, obviously,
Yeah.
to fix things after the fact. I mean, like let's take a private patient election in a public hospital.
Hmm.
Um, it's too late to elect after the procedure. You
Yeah.
know, that it has to
Yeah.
be informed before they start the care.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it can happen. It can happen while they're in a bed awaiting care. That's fine.
Hmm.
But you know, it really has to be before the care
Okay.
to have that conversation. And then overseas, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, Medicare eligible, no private health insurance. Uh, there's also a pressure for hospitals to, you know, free up beds, and if a patient is medically fit for discharge
Hmm.
and consents, then they may go home, and then that financial conversation hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And once
Okay.
they're home, they might go home completely to their other country,
Yeah.
and then it becomes much harder to chase.
Yeah. It's almost impossible. And I mean, conversely, from what you've seen helping these hospitals, what do the changes look like when they are ensuring the classification and the IFC are happening properly at booking or even, before well before admission?
Yeah, significant improvements to all the things we've talked about. So, um, even at the heart of the hospital's mission, right, the patient care, the patients have a better experience. They're very well informed.
Hmm.
Um, you know, even with the awkward conversation around money, as long as you have that conversation, at
Hmm.
least people have a choice
Yeah.
as they want whether they want to proceed or not. They don't have the sting of the bill after, or the bill shock.
Yeah.
Then there's the cash flow and the revenue maximization or optimization.
Yeah. Okay.
So the obviously the cash flow of the hospital, if they're not doing write-offs, it's smoother. It's obviously higher.
Hmm.
And then in terms of revenue optimization, it's significantly more optimized because they're able to claim the benefits where they're due, such
Yep.
as an electing private patient with their healthcare health fund rebate, and
Mm.
also having, you know, a Medicare and eligible patient pay the cost of their procedure.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, if, in dealing with the hospitals that you've dealt with, if you had to kind of give a checklist, like an overall checklist of what the general consensus is, what does an ideal pre-admission checklist include? What does that look like?
Yeah, many and varied. But if we just
Okay.
focus on the financial aspects,
Mm-hmm.
obviously there's the clinical and in the administrative, but on the
Yep.
financial, consent, consent, consent. Having an informed consent
Yeah.
about how the patient is electing, if they have that
Mm-hmm.
choice, and what are the implications of their admission. Really having that
Mm-hmm.
well documented. Um, in some states and some hospitals, potentially nationally in Australia, there's a witnessing process where
Mm-hmm.
someone has to witness, a staff member has to witness the election. Um, and in a more scheduled private context, private hospital context, then yeah, having an IFC nearly always, I can't think of many exceptions to that, an
Mm-hmm.
HC21,
Yeah.
and ideally having a prepayment before they come to hospital of
Yeah.
the known cost based on the estimate, because then there's one less question on admission. Instead of,
Yeah.
you know, how are you paying, it's how can we help you, how can we serve you.
Yeah. Just everyone's on the same page, no awkwardness, no stress, and then just kind of getting, like you said, focusing on, what really matters and what
That's right.
yeah, what everyone's energy is best spent on. And I mean, obviously generally, we know that, we've been talking about the benefits. Is there anything you would add that you had reported to you about, how revenue certainty and cash flow has been impacted, once services have really implemented these changes?
Yeah. um, from, I guess, a chaotic scenario to a perfect scenario makes a big difference
Yeah.
in revenue and cash flow. um, the the cost of having several FTE alone
Mm.
chasing missed revenue, chasing cash flow issues, making write offs, just on
Yeah.
that alone, reallocating them to patient care is a
Hmm.
significant improvement to
Yeah.
cash flow. I wouldn't have the numbers, and they would vary.
Yeah.
Not many hospitals are willing to air their dirty laundry, right?
Yeah. Of
But
course.
yeah, they're definitely there. Definitely millions of dollars for big hospitals.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Yeah. And don't worry, hospitals. We're not naming any names. Okay.
Yeah,
This is just generally
yeah. It's
what we're seeing.
ju-
Yeah.
just a generic, broad brush description of kind of many different conversations,
Yeah.
and what I've seen is that uh, there's not a lot of outliers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hospital systems are always under pressure, and so
Yeah.
these things tend to always surface.
Yeah. In my time, I've noticed that too. It just seems like a lot of services are dealing with a lot of the very same issues. And I think this is kind of related too, but what reported impact has it had on admin workload
Yeah,
for, a lot of these services?
I think if you compare like a gold standard process
Hmm.
with maybe like a very manual paper based process, it really adds up for the admin teams, the people at the front desk,
Hmm.
because they have to complete, you know, like let's talk about a scheduled admission for a private hospital,
Hmm.
having to complete the HC21, get a signature on the estimate of fees, to get IFC informed financial consent. Um, that could be 5 to 10 minutes, say, but then
Hmm.
think about how many patients are coming through the hospital in that one day. So it really
Yeah.
adds up. And that's on
Yeah.
top of, you know, registering the patient, navigating the patient to where they need to go,
Yeah.
whether it's to a particular ward or, waiting area, um, as well as answering phones and
Yeah.
talking to doctors' rooms. It's just one headache on top of others.
Yeah. Just 'cause quite overwhelming. Okay. And so I guess, if we were going to summarize everything we've just talked about, if hospitals are wanting to reduce revenue leakage, where do you think they need to begin in the workflow?
Yeah. I think for a private hospital, private and public are going to have different answers. But just in my experience, based on what I've seen, private hospitals focusing on having a robust um,
Yeah.
IFC process as early as possible compared to admission. There are
Mhm.
some health fund rules and contracts requiring that checks are remade in the days leading up to admission, but there's no harm starting earlier and then rechecking later. And
Yeah.
then for public hospitals, it's really having a robust 24/7 process for their ED attendances,
Yeah.
because patient liaison teams uh, need to sleep, but care
Yeah.
doesn't. And
Yeah.
so the, the patients coming in all hours of the night, having a
Yeah.
robust process that captures them while
Yeah.
still putting their care as the priority, I
Yeah.
think is a great place to start.
Yeah. That's a great line too, Edward. EpiSoft, care never sleeps.
I don't
No,
mean to sound
awesome.
so cliche. It's
No,
just
I would
it's
say
just what I'm seeing.
inspirational. No, but that's great. No, well, hey, thank you, Edward. I think that's great, for this topic. And so thank you for, letting me pick your brain about that. And anybody listening, thank you so much for listening in. We hope it was useful, helpful in some way. And yeah, and hopefully we'll see you next time with some more useful information. And if any of you, if there are any services out there listening to this, and you'd like us to maybe take a look at, your current workflows, current states, areas where we might have ideas about how to streamline things or improve things. Of course, we're always more than happy to have you reach out to us. We'd love to have that conversation with you, and we wish you all the best in taking care of Australia and beyond.
Yeah, this was for a topic that's reasonably dry but
Yeah,
important. It was quite fun. So
there we
thanks for
go.
the session, Jeremy.
Of course, yeah, and thank you, Edward. I had to bite my tongue many a time from getting too silly.